It was a bright Monday morning in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The sun rose gently above the city, casting golden light over the rooftops. At the presidential palace, the guard stood tall and alert as President Ibrahim Traore stepped out dressed simply in a neat, dark brown shirt and trousers. He looked calm but determined. Unlike other days, filled with long meetings and official duties, this day was different. President Traore had a plan, one he had shared with no one except his driver. He wanted to visit the central prison without warning. No press, no media, no preparation, just himself and his heart. "Drive me to the prison," he told his driver. "I want to see how the people in there are living. No one must know." The driver was shocked but didn't ask questions. He nodded and started the engine. The black presidential vehicle left. The palace quietly escorted by only 2 plain police cars about. 40 minutes later, the car stopped in front of the largest prison in the city, Ouagadougou Central Correctional Facility. It was a dusty place surrounded by high, gray walls topped with barbed wire. The guards at the gate were confused when they saw who was in the car. The president of the country was standing at their gate like an ordinary visitor. "Mr. President," one of them stammered quickly, opening the gate. We were not informed." "I know," President Traore replied firmly. "That is why I came. Take me inside the prison." Warden, a short man named Monsieur Pascal, came rushing to greet him, sweating heavily. "Sir, if only we had known, we would have prepared." "I'm not here for preparation," the president said, walking past him. "Take me to the prisoners. I want to speak with them." Still confused, Pascal obeyed. He led President Traore down a narrow hallway filled with echoes of footsteps and the distant sounds of coughing, shouting, and sorrow. The smell was strong. Dust, sweat, and hopelessness hung in the air. As the prison entered the main prison block, hundreds of inmates stopped whatever they were doing. Some were sitting on the floor playing cards. Others were lying down, looking tired. A few were praying silently. One by one, they stood up, surprised, confused, and amazed. The president greeted them humbly, shaking hands and asking them questions. "How long have you been here? What crime were you accused of? Do you have family?" Most of the prisoners responded with fear, unsure if this was a trick or a miracle. But the president listened, patiently, his eyes meeting each man's eyes with kindness and respect. After an hour of moving from cell to cell, something happened. The president noticed a man sitting quietly in the corner of a small, dark cell. The man was not talking like the others. He wasn't even standing. His head was bowed, and his face was tired. He looked like someone who had lost everything. President Traore walked closer and stopped in front of him. "What is your name?" he asked. The man looked up slowly, his eyes filled with pain and sadness. "Emmanuel," he said softly. "How long have you been here, Emmanuel?" 7 years, sir. What was your crime?" Emmanuel swallowed hard. "They said I stole money from my boss, but I didn't. I worked for him for many years. He accused me because he wanted to get rid of me and hire his nephew. I had no lawyer. No one believed me. I am a poor man." The president looked into Emmanuel's eyes. Something about him was different. There was no hate, no bitterness, just quiet pain, the kind that comes from being abandoned and wrongly judged. "Why didn't you appeal?" "I tried," Emmanuel whispered. "But I have no money. My wife left me. My children were taken away. No one visited me in all these years." A deep silence filled the room. The other prisoners listened. Even the prison guards were quiet. Everyone could see that the president was moved. President Traore stood there for a long time, then finally spoke. "I believe you, Emmanuel," the warden gasped. "Mr. President," I said, "I believe him," the president repeated, "and I will find out the truth." Turning to the guards, he gave an order. "Bring me his case file before the end of today. I want every detail. Who arrested him, who judged the case, and who was the accuser." "Everything, yes, sir," they answered quickly. Then he looked at Emmanuel again and said, "Your story is not over. I give you my word." As he walked out of the prison block, every prisoner stood in silence. Something had changed in the air. Hope, which had been buried for so long, began to rise again. Outside the prison, the president told his driver, "Cancel my meetings today. I am going to the Ministry of Justice." "Oh, but sir, no. Excuses, a man's life is waiting." And with that, the black vehicle drove off. Once more, This time not just carrying a president but a mission of justice. President Ibrahim Traore sat silently in his office at the Ministry of Justice. The air conditioner hummed softly, but it couldn't cool the heat felt in his chest. Emmanuel's face refused to leave his mind. Those eyes, tired but honest, haunted him. He had met thousands of people shaken, hands with leaders from around the world, but there was something different about that man. "Get me the Chief Justice," he said firmly to his aide. "I want him here now." The aide nodded and rushed out. Moments later, Justice Minister Diouf arrived, adjusting his tie nervously. He knew this wasn't a regular meeting. The president looked serious, too serious. "Mr. President, you asked to see me urgently," he said, trying to sound calm. "Yes," Traore replied. "I visited Ouagadougou Central Prison this morning. I met a man named Emmanuel. He has been locked up for 7 years for a crime he insists he didn't commit." Diouf hesitated. "Sir, the courts failed him," Traore said sharply. "His case must be reopened. I want to know who judged it, who arrested him, and why he had no legal support. This is not just about Emmanuel. It's about how many more like him may be suffering in silence." "Yes, sir," Diouf said, lowering his eyes. "I'll personally go through his case file." "Not just you," Traore said. "Set up a fresh team, independent eyes, no politics, no games. I want truth and justice within. Ours, a small task force of honest lawyers and human rights officers was formed. They began digging into Emmanuel's file. What they found was shocking. The case was handled by a corrupt judge who had been dismissed years ago for accepting bribes. Emmanuel's employer, a wealthy businessman named Laurent Gira, had used his influence to speed up the trial. No lawyer had defended Emmanuel, and the only evidence against him was a poorly written statement. One, Emmanuel claimed he was forced to sign under threat. "This is terrible," said one of the officers. "The man was framed. The whole trial was a setup." That evening, the president received the full report. He read every line carefully. When he reached the end, he closed the file slowly and whispered, "I knew he was telling the truth." The next morning he returned to the prison, this time with cameras and reporters. The nation watched in shock as President Traore entered Emmanuel's cell again, this time with hope. In his eyes, "Emmanuel," he said warmly, "I have read your file. You were not only wrongly accused, you were abandoned by a system that should have protected you." "I'm sorry," Emmanuel blinked, confused. "Sir, you are going home," the president said. "Today," gasps echoed around the prison. Emmanuel looked around like he was dreaming. "Is this real?" he asked, tears welling in his eyes. "Yes, it is," Charlie said. "You're a free man." A crowd had gathered outside the prison by the time Emmanuel stepped out. He looked thinner, older and unsure. He held no bag. He had nothing but the sun that fell on his face that day was not the same sun that shone when he entered prison 7 years ago. Reporters rushed toward him. "How do you feel, sir? What will you do now?" Emmanuel looked down at his hands, then up at the sky. "I don't know," he said softly. "I have no family, no house, no job, but I have hope. That's enough for now." President Traore placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone." He took Emmanuel into his official car and drove him to the presidential guest house. For the first time in years, Emmanuel bathed with clean water, ate real food, and slept on a soft bed. The next day, President Traore invited him to the palace. "I want to hear everything," he said. "Your childhood, your job, your dreams." Emmanuel told him about growing up in a small village, how he worked hard as a clerk, how he married young, and how everything crumbled when he was arrested. "I wanted to be a teacher," he said, "but life had other plans." The president nodded. "Well, life has changed again, and this time you're in charge." Emmanuel smiled, faintly, the first real smile in years. That afternoon, President Traore called a press conference. He stood before cameras and said, "Today we correct a mistake. But this is not just about one man. We must fix a broken system. No citizen should suffer in silence. I will not rest until our justice system protects the innocent and punishes the guilty fairly." He turned to Emmanuel, who stood beside him in borrowed clothes, his hands shaking. "Meet Emmanuel. He is not a criminal. He is a survivor, and he is now part of a new task force to help us investigate other wrongful imprisonments across the country." The crowd burst into applause. Emmanuel's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of hope. And just like that, a man forgotten by the world became a symbol of justice and change in Burkina Faso. The news spread across Burkina Faso like wildfire. Every newspaper, radio station, and TV channel carried the same headline: President Traore frees innocent man after surprise prison visit. But for President Ibrahim Traore, Emmanuel's release was just the beginning. Call for a national audit, he told Minister Duff the next morning. I want the files of every prisoner who has served more than 5 years, especially those without legal support. Yes, sir, Du said, though clearly overwhelmed. That's a huge task. Then we must start now, Traore replied. One innocent person in jail is one too many. Meanwhile, Emmanuel had begun settling into the presidential guest house, but he didn't feel like a guest. He felt like a stranger in a new world. Everything had changed while he was locked away. The roads were different. Technology had advanced. People spoke faster. Life outside was louder, quicker, and more confusing. One evening he sat in the garden behind the guest house watching the sunset. A young aide named Joseph approached and offered him a small notebook and a pen. The president thought you might want to write your story, Joseph said. Emmanuel nodded slowly, then opened the notebook. On the first page he wrote 7 years in silence. Then he stared at the words for a long time. The next day, President Traore invited Emmanuel to a special meeting at the Ministry of Justice. Seated around the large table were senior lawyers, prison officers, and a few representatives from human rights groups. Today, the president began, we are going to listen to the unheard. He turned to Emmanuel. Please speak. They must hear your story. Emmanuel stood slowly. He looked around the room and took a deep breath. Was 28 when I was arrested. I was accused by the man I had served for 8 years. No. One asked for my side. I was beaten. I was forced to sign a confession I didn't write. At the trial, I stood alone. The judge didn't ask me questions. He only read the charges and declared me guilty. I was sent to prison for 15 years. He paused, his voice shaking. In prison, I lost everything. My wife sent me divorce papers. My children stopped writing. My friends disappeared. I tried to stay strong, but each day felt like dying. Slowly, the room was silent. Even the most powerful officials couldn't look him in. I'm not here to blame, Emmanuel continued. I'm here to ask how many more. People are like me who will speak for them, President. Traore clapped, and soon everyone joined in, not because they were told to, but because they were moved. From that moment, Emmanuel became more than a symbol. He became a voice. The president appointed him as the head of a new committee, the Justice Review Task Force. Their job was to travel around the country, visit prisons, listen to inmates, and find other innocent people who had been forgotten by the system. Their first stop was a prison in Boba Dioulasso. It was smaller than the central prison in Ouagadougou, but just as overcrowded. Emmanuel, now wearing a white shirt with a badge that read, Justice for All, walked through the gates with confidence. Inside, he met a man named Isidore who had been in prison for 12 years, the charge armed robbery. But there were no witnesses, no fingerprints, and the weapon had never been found. Why are you still here? Emmanuel asked gently. Isidore looked up with tears. Because I have no one, and no one believes me. I believe you, Emmanuel said the same way President Traore once said to him, and I will help you. Back in the capital, President Traore was working harder than ever. He met with judges, police officials, and legal experts. He ordered training programs to help police understand human rights better. He told judges that rushing cases without proper evidence would no longer be accepted. This is not a favor, he told them. It is a duty. The following weeks, Emmanuel's team found 27 other prisoners who had no clear evidence against them. Some had no case files at all. Others had already completed their sentences, but were never released due to errors in documentation. President Traore took action on every report. He signed releases. He approved retrials. He compensated the wrongly imprisoned. The country watched in awe. Never before had a leader taken such a personal interest in the lives of ordinary people, especially those behind bars. But not everyone was happy. Some powerful men who once controlled the justice system began to complain. The president is making us look like fool, they said behind closed doors. He's digging too deep. They didn't know that President Traore was not afraid. He had made a promise to himself and to Emmanuel that he would not stop until justice reached the deepest corners of the nation. One night during a national TV interview, the host asked him, "Why did you take this so personally, sir?" The president smiled. "Because justice should never be a privilege for the rich. It should be the right of every citizen, rich or poor, educated or not, free or in prison." Emmanuel reminded me that leadership is not about power. It is about people. That answer made headlines. The next morning, leadership is about people. President Traore speaks on justice reform. From every region, people began writing letters to the president thanking him. Some shared their own stories, others asked for help, and some just said, "Thank you for listening." But the journey was not over. In a small village near Kaya, a woman wrote a letter. It was short but powerful. "My son was taken by mistake. He has been in prison for 9 years. Please help us." The letter landed on President Traore's desk just as he finished reading Emmanuel's notebook. He closed the book and whispered, "We're just getting started." The morning breeze in Ouagadougou carried a strange mix of hope and tension. At the presidential office, President Ibrahim Traore sat at his desk, holding the handwritten letter from the woman in Kaya. Her words were few, but they had weight. "My son was taken by mistake. He has been in prison for 9 years. Please, help us." He turned to his aide. "Prepare for a visit to Kaya. Tell Emmanuel to join me." Within hours, a convoy left the capital, heading northeast toward the dusty village. The road was long and rough, but President Traore didn't complain. Emmanuel sat quietly beside him, holding a small notebook and pen. Since his release, he had taken the habit of recording every case they encountered. "I wonder how many more letters like this we'll get," Emmanuel said. The president nodded. "Until justice lives in every home, we keep moving." By late afternoon, they arrived in Kaya. The village was poor and quiet. The air smelled of dry grass and wood smoke. Children stopped playing when they saw the black cars. Women peeked from their huts, wondering what brought the president of the country to their humble community. An old woman stepped forward. Slowly, she was barefoot, wearing a faded wrapper and blouse. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she managed a small bow. "Welcome, Mr. President," she said with trembling hands. "I am the one who wrote the letter." President Traore walked to her and took her hands in his. "Thank you for writing. Tell me everything." The woman, named Mama Florence, told the story of her only son, Jacob. He was just 19 when he was arrested. A local shop had been robbed, and Jacob was nearby walking home from work. Because he had no ID and looked nervous, the police took him in. Within 2 days, he was sent to prison without trial, without proof, without a lawyer. "I went to the police station many times," Mama Florence cried. "They told me the case was closed. I sold my goats to pay for transport to the city to look for him, but I was too poor. I gave up. I prayed instead." Emmanuel wrote every word in his notebook. The president placed a hand on the old woman's shoulder. "You did the right thing by writing me. We will find Jacob." The convoy left for Kaya Regional Prison. Immediately, it was a small crumbling building surrounded by a rusted fence. The prison staff didn't expect visitors, especially not the president of the country. "Get me Jacob's file." The president ordered. The prison officer scratched his head. "So we don't have a file for a Jacob?" "What do you mean?" Emmanuel asked. "Some prisoners were never processed properly," the officer admitted. "We only keep paper logs. Some of them are missing." President Traore's face tightened. "Show me the logbook." They brought an old brown book, its pages torn and stained. After flipping through carefully, Emmanuel found an entry: Jacob F. arrested on a suspicion of theft. No release date, no trial date, no signature, no follow-up. Emmanuel whispered, "He's been buried alive in here." The president stood up sharply. "Take me to him." They were led through dark hallways and narrow doors until they reached a small cell in the far corner. Inside, a man sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his beard thick, hair unkempt. He looked up slowly. When they entered, his eyes adjusting to the light. "Jacob," the president said. The man blinked. "Yes, I'm President Ibrahim Traore. We've come for you." Jacob sat in disbelief. "Me, yes, your mother wrote to me." At first, Jacob didn't move. His lips trembled. Then tears rolled down his cheeks. He hadn't heard his mother's voice or seen sunlight properly in 90 years. He had given up "Please," he said softly, "don't lie to me." "I'm not lying," Traore replied. "You are going home." They walked him out of the cell. Every prisoner along the way stared in shock. It wasn't every day a forgotten man was rescued by the president himself. At the gates, Mama Florence was waiting. When Jacob saw her, he froze. "Mama," he whispered. "My son," she cried, running into his arms. "I knew you were alive. I knew." They wept together, and even the guards wiped their eyes. Emmanuel stood, close holding his notebook tightly. It was another story, another life saved. From silence, President Traore called a press briefing right there in Kaya. He held Jacob's old logbook in the air and said, "This is not justice, this is failure, this cannot continue." He announced a new law immediately. Every prisoner must be reviewed within 6 months. No one can be held without proper records. Every region must digitize their files within 1 year. Any officer found holding innocent people will be investigated and punished. The crowd clapped. Hope was alive again on their way back to the capital. Emmanuel turned to the president. "How did we let this happen for so long?" "We stopped listening," Traore answered. "That's the danger of power. You begin to hear only the loud and forget the silent." Emmanuel nodded and opened his notebook. At the top of a fresh page he wrote, "Justice is not given. It is earned and protected. The E." Next day, Jacob was given new clothes, a clean shave, and a hot meal. His mother could not stop smiling. The president gave him a scholarship to return to school and offered his mother a new house in Kaya. As the sun set over the capital, preside